Today, we dive deeper into the dark history of the Communist Party. We'll focus on events taking place after the death of the communist revolutionary Mao Zedong, also known as Chairman Mao. For instance, what really happened during the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre? Is the historical record accurate, or has it been rewritten? Was the former Communist Party leader's rise to power legitimate? Or was it riddled with deceit and manipulation? And in what ways did his campaign of terror and bloodshed vastly surpass the rulers who went before him? Was this Chinese spiritual practice, only recently revealed, the sole and primary target of an entire country's political government? And what did it teach that actually benefited more than 100 million people in less than 7 years? Let's dig into this two-part series. Only on the Edge of Wonder.
Welcome to Edge of Wonder. So to spin off our series on communism, we wanted to bring you guys what is happening in China today and with the current situation of the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, let's start with the Tiananmen Square massacre. So in our previous episode, we covered the rise of communism in China with Mao and its Red Cultural Revolution, how it destroyed traditional culture, religion and faith, how it killed over 100 million people through famines, wars, and brutal killings, and also how it set Chinese people against each other, including even their own family members.
It also set a precedent that every 10 years or so, there needs to be a massive suppression of the people in order to instill fear and get them to submit in order for the Communist Party to maintain control. China has 1 billion people. If they were to rebel, they would take over the party in seconds.
The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, fears this so much that it has become normal for the Chinese people to be terrified from having critical thoughts about the party, as if the party could actually read your mind or something.
I mean, this is exactly how George Orwell's 1984 describes the thought police. People in the party are forced to write down their thoughts in journals, and if anything seems out of place, they'll be questioned, go through propaganda brainwashing, jailed, or even killed.
After Mao's death in the 70s, people were forever scarred by his Cultural Revolution and were left in despair. They found it virtually impossible to view the Communist Party in any positive light after millions upon millions were killed. I wonder why.
China needed to regain support from the people, so slowly an economic reform started to happen. Since the Chinese feared that they could lose everything, they adapted by working hard, saving their money, and staying at a job long term.
As a result, this benefited the party, and soon China started to produce more goods and became a leader in international trade. However, this only led to even more political corruption and moral decline. Party members benefited from counterfeiting goods, which actually continues this very day in even more extreme ways.
Soon after, Deng Xiaoping led China, and then only the corrupt officials got promoted. After a few more years, some party members started to think that China should follow the ways of the Western world and actually have a reform.
Hu Yaobang, a high-ranking official in China, started to reject Mao's Marxist views and became popular among students since he promoted things like freedom of speech and the press.
Get this, a New York Times article from 1989 writes, when he was asked which of Mao's thoughts were applicable in China's efforts to modernize its economy, he replied, I think none.
What made this guy a hero to so many free thinkers in China was his willingness to steer the country away from Marxism, and that made him wildly influential.
How does China respond to a person like Hu Yaobang who goes against the grain? They forced him to resign and made him walk back on his words against the party.
After his death in April of 1989, over 10,000 students marched to Tiananmen Square to attend his memorial service and deliver the petition letter to then Premier Li Peng.
Students and professors publicly mourned his death all over the streets in Beijing. Their resentment towards nepotism and their unfair treatment to Hu Yaobang sparked the Tiananmen protests of 1989.
Soon others heard about it, and Chinese people from all over started to pour in to join in on the protest. As more and more information started to come in and out of China, many of the Chinese people looked to the West and saw how democracy allowed the American people to live peacefully.
At this point in May, over 1 million people came to protest in Tiananmen Square both day and night, demanding a reform in the party and the adoption of democracy. They even created a Statue of Liberty type figure they called Goddess of Democracy, demanding that the party reform.
The protests were extremely peaceful, and news media from all over the world started to report for the first time what was happening in China with live updates.
Some party members just came out to talk to the students without any notice, to ask them what kind of reform they would like. I mean, this showed that they knew the protesters were not dangerous.
All of this sent Deng Xiaoping over the edge. In a rage, he called for all of this to end and ordered the military to remove the protesters with force.
Many Chinese officials didn't think military force was necessary, but Deng threatened to arrest the officials who disagreed. However, one person saw his opportunity to rise in ranks. His name is Jiang Zemin.
Now, you may be wondering why we're telling you this story when this episode is supposed to be about organ harvesting. Well, it was basically to tell you the story leading up to this worthless piece of cosmic waste. So bear with us while we explain everything.
His entire family has been filled with lies and deceit. Although Jiang's father is viewed as a hero, he actually sold out the Chinese to the Japanese, which helped the Chinese Communist Party in the early days rise to power. So in this way, Jiang encouraged the military to be brought in to control the people.
Soon a large standoff between the people and the military took place and lasted for days. That's when the tanks came in. You guys might be familiar with the famous tank man, right? He stood alone in front of a line of tanks, preventing them from moving forward. It is one of the most famous photos in the history of ever.
To this day, no one knows what happened to him, but many people believe the Chinese military arrested and then tortured him to death. So then on June 4th, 1989, pandemonium broke out as Deng ordered the military to shoot on sight. Tanks shot and trampled the protesters, disabling and killing many of them.
The official story from the CCP, which is still in all Chinese textbooks today, is that during the June 4th incident, the students incited violence and attacked the military, and that's why the military opened fire on the students.
So the moral of the story is this: the CCP is trying to tell us that the party is always right. So if you want to protest, you are in the wrong, and you will get jailed or killed.
Right. Now, compare this with the United States. I guess we should be thankful that we can actually protest anything we want over here in the West, right?
In an article by the Epoch Times, Feng Zheng had his legs crushed by a tank who was forbidden to talk about it. They even blamed him for getting violent. The article states,
Fang was an athlete denied participation in the Paralympics in China because he would not lie about how he came to be disabled. He was put under house arrest and isolated and discriminated against in his workplace and who he could speak to. If he simply lied on behalf of the regime, he could have been spared some trouble that lasted for 20 years, a struggle with officials over the nature of the truth.
According to conservative numbers, over 3,000 people died, with thousands more injured. The CCP has never officially released the numbers because they never do that. Oh, and if you've never heard of this, don't be surprised. I mean, it's even downplayed in the West. For example, Wikipedia calls it the Tiananmen Square protests instead of massacre, and don't even estimate how many died. Why? We don't know.
it's Wikipedia, that's why.
Correct.
After the crumbling of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Union, Deng Xiaoping knew he had to have someone in power to not let the Communist Party fall as well. Because Jiang went along with the massacre, Deng knew he could trust Jiang.
Jiang did everything he could to make sure he became the new leader of China. He bribed, blackmailed, and shamed anyone who got in his way. Soon, he rose to power as the new leader of China, marking a new era of terror and bloodshed that no other predecessor could even match.
Jiang continued carrying out the persecution of Tibetan monks, started to use gangs of China to do his dirty deeds, allowed party members to make illegal drugs which they sold overseas, and was jealous over anyone who he considered a threat.
Many party members couldn't even stand this guy. But he moved his own people up into top positions. Basically, all of them were from Shanghai. Other despicable traits of his were that he also was a womanizer who had many extramarital relationships and truly believed that the Chinese people could only be controlled through suppression. In 1992, the practice of Falun Gong or Falun Dafa started to be spread in China. For those not familiar with this, it's a type of Qigong practice similar to Tai Chi that was free to learn and was made popular by Mr. Li Hongzhi.
Falun Gong is a cultivation method that has been handed down for thousands of years in private, but was finally brought out publicly throughout the 90s. Within a few short years, its popularity skyrocketed in China, and you could pretty much see practice sites all over the country.
At the beginning, even the Chinese government endorsed Falun Gong within China because people felt happier and healthier. The practice saved the country so much money on healthcare costs. There are many, many miraculous stories of people getting healed through practicing Falun Gong.
Yeah, even I know someone who made a full recovery from her health issues. Her doctor told her that she had a heart murmur and a lung tumor. They gave her 3 months to live. After practicing Falun Gong, she returned to the doctors and they said to her, whatever you're doing, keep doing it because it's working. It has been over 20 years and she's still alive with no issues at all.
Yeah, actually there's a lot of stories like this. There's one story about a scientist who had Guillain-Barré syndrome. I'm not sure if you guys know what this is, but it's an autoimmune disorder. Basically your immune system attacks your peripheral nervous system. It's actually pretty fatal. After starting to practice, it actually just magically disappeared. And literally, upon going to the doctor, it was the same exact reply. Congratulations, you're in complete remission. I have no explanation, but keep doing whatever you're doing. I mean, what? There's literally hundreds of stories like this one.
So how did this happen? Falun Gong is a meditation and spiritual practice that is an advanced self-cultivation practice of the Buddha school system. I mean, we have talked about it before in our previous episode.
This means that practitioners focus on something called xinxing, or one's character. This means striving to become a better person by always looking within when you encounter any hardship, conflict, or when faced with an uncomfortable situation.
In essence, one would assimilate their character to the universal principles of truthfulness, compassion, and endurance. By using these qualities, one would judge every action, thought, and intention that we have.
I mean, that's what these people were doing, and by doing so, one would then elevate their mind and body, which in return started making their bodies healthier and free of illness. At the same time, one would strive to remove attachments such as wants, anger, jealousy, desires, and so on, with the goal to obtain spiritual perfection, enlightenment, or even more. I mean, this is the Eastern kind of thinking, right?
Right. Because Falun Gong instilled hope in the Chinese people and reinvigorated people with traditional values and beliefs in the divine, everyone started to practice. High-ranking party members also started to practice Falun Gong. It got to the point where even rumors spread that Zhang's wife started to practice.
They would promote the practice on news programs in China and encourage people to learn it. According to the Epoch Times' 9 commentaries on the Communist Party, Zhang started becoming extremely jealous. He felt since he was the leader, everyone needed to listen to him and no one else. What a man baby. I mean, it really doesn't get any more pathetic than that.
Yeah, I mean, all of this sounds good, right? Well, resentment, hatred, and fear built up in him so much that he started to think on how to eliminate the so-called problem, which he saw as a threat to the party. Since everything he was doing was based on killing, lies, and corruption, basically everything that goes against the practice or even the universe.
By 1998, the CCP started to conduct their own surveys. They found that more than 100 million people started practicing Falun Gong in China. I mean, this was even more than the registered members the party had itself. Now, in China, they allowed Qigong practices, religious beliefs, and churches and temples and all of that, but you actually would have to register what your beliefs are with the party.
Also, most of the head monks and priests in the temples and churches are all party members of the CCP. This is so they have complete control over these religions and limits what a religion can and can't teach. For example, many of the teachings and sayings of Jesus have been removed from the Bible inside China.
Anything that the CCP would consider a threat would be removed. There are many underground Christian churches which are also being heavily persecuted. According to a report from the South China Morning Post, over 140 million Christians suffered high levels of hostility in Asia last year alone.
In fact, the Christian persecution is very underreported. There are even people risking their lives smuggling in the full version of the Bible after the CCP modified the one that is currently being used.
Well, coming back to April of 1999, a few Falun Gong practitioners were arrested by the police in the city of Tianjin. Practitioners felt the need to do something, and soon a grassroots movement started where practitioners went to Beijing to peacefully appeal at Zhongnanhai, which is the party's central headquarters.
Over 10,000 people showed up, mostly elderly and families, to ask for the release of their fellow practitioners and to stop the government from persecuting the practice. According to many reports, they were very peaceful, mostly meditating and even picking up litter and cigarette butts from the ground from the police officer.
And I mean, you guys know how many people smoke in China. There's a lot of cigarette butts. According to the Minhui.org website, 3 practitioners met with then Premier Zhu Rongji to ask for the release of the people arrested in Tianjin and for protection of Falun Gong practitioners' right to follow their beliefs.
Zhu agreed that Falun Gong should be practiced freely, and by nightfall, the arrested people in Tianjin were released. The demonstrators dispersed quietly and went home, trusting that the Chinese leaders would follow through on their promise.
However, Jiang began to become more infuriated and started to worry that if all China practiced this, his life would be in danger somehow. Plus, he was jealous of the practice itself and the following it had.
Then, on July 20th, 1999, Jiang ordered that Falun Gong be labeled officially illegal to practice and demanded that the police arrest, detain, and even kill those who were found practicing either in public or even in their homes.
The media switched from encouraging people to practice to telling people that practitioners eat their babies, commit suicide, are involved in terrorist activities, and other slanderous things. Business owners were forced to fire any employees who practiced, or the CCP would take over their businesses.
The government confiscated bank accounts of practitioners, and most couldn't return home to their family members in fear that even they would be arrested. Students were expelled from school, and any of the teachers or professors who were practicing were arrested on the spot.
Jiang figured that in 3 months he would have Falun Gong completely wiped out of China. However, something happened that he never expected. The people would not give up their practice.
The party built prisons just for Falun Gong practitioners and Christians to torture, make them do forced labor work day and night. They used the most vile methods of abuse and torture to try to pry names and family members, and then they would go arrest them too.
The methods the CCP used are beyond anything used from any past communist regime. They shocked and beat practitioners with electrical batons, focusing on the genitalia, force-fed victims with feces and urine, put cigarette butts out on their bare skin, impaling of fingernails with sharpened bamboo sticks, and I mean, the list really does go on.
But this is just the beginning. They also use something called tiger bench. The victims are placed on a bench with his or her legs stretched out and tied tightly with straps. Bricks are then placed under the victim's heels, with more layers added until the straps break, causing unbearable pain. Some are like this for days, weeks, or even months.
The movie Letters from Masanja is about how a jailed Falun Gong practitioner was able to secretly send a letter about his life in hell inside a Halloween toy, which was sold in the US and found by a woman.
The movie is about the man who actually wrote the letter and realizes it was found. He tells his story in real time, even though he knows his life is in danger, to expose the torture he went through along with many others, all while still living inside China.
我们当时心里非常恐怖，这个感受就是五马分尸那感觉。
有良心，没法看。
This is actually just the beginning. Jiang even said it's not a crime to beat Falun Gong practitioners to death. If a Falun Gong practitioner is beaten to death, it is counted as suicide.
The point is that they try to get practitioners to reform and stop practicing. If they did, they're actually released. So why are they choosing death and torture over reforming?
If they did reform and vow to stop practicing, the CCP would promote them on TV, forcing them to make damning comments about Falun Gong and also use them to persuade others to quit.
They also needed to give all the names and addresses of other practitioners so then they can help them reform. So instead of betraying their consciousness and their friends and family, many would rather suffer the torture or even die.
I mean, many people benefited so much from this practice that they felt like they would be betraying it if they were to say something bad about it. Similar to why the Christians refused to give up their faith during the Roman persecutions after Jesus' crucifixion, and in China now too.
After a few years, the CCP wanted to find more ways to benefit from all those people they had in labor camps. Zhang realized how healthy all of these spiritual and religious people are. So he concocted something so evil and horrible that no dictator in the past could even compare to.
They realized that one person's body was worth millions in organ transplantations. Thus, organ harvesting was done on a scale so massive that it became a huge money-making operation for the entire CCP, and even for international businesses and foundations.
Sadly, even a few of our own presidents made it easier for China to sell illegal organs on the international market and even the black market.
But we'll get into all of this and more on our next episode of illegal organ harvesting and how this is a military operation.
So until then, we'll see you guys out
on the edge. He bribed, blackmailed, and shamed anyone who got in his way. Soon, he rose to power as the new leader of China, making a new error. Correct, that was an error.
That's definitely going to be in the...
A new error of bloodshed. It was an error, John. You suck, my friend.